Welcome to AmeenAcademy.com. In History of Muslim World, let us discuss about history of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now let me to read detailedly. Here are some key events in the life of Prophet Muhammad. These are important keywords. AD 570, Muhammad is born in Mecca. AD 610, Muhammad receives his first revelation from Allah on the Mount Hira. 622, Muhammad and his followers migrate from Mecca to Medina in an event known as the Hijrah, which marks the beginning of the Islamic calendar. 624, Muhammad's forces win the Battle of Badr, a turning point for Islam against the Quraysh tribe. 625, the Quraysh tribe defeats the Muslims in the Battle of Uhud. 626, the Battle of the Trench, also known as the Battle of the Confederates and the Battle of Khandak, takes place. In 627, the Muslims capture the Jewish stronghold in the siege of Bani Qurayza. In 628, the Treaty of Hudaybiyah is signed between Muhammad's Muslims and the people of Mecca. In 629, Muhammad and his Muslims make their first pilgrimage to Mecca after migrating to Medina. Now let us discuss further about Muhammad's life in Mecca. Prophet Muhammad, son of Abdullah, son of Abdul Muttalib of the tribe of Quraysh, was born in Makkah 53 years before the Hijrah. His father died before he was born, and he was protected first by the grandfather Abdul Muttalib, and after his grandfather's death by his uncle Abu Talib. As a young boy, he traveled with his uncle in the merchant's caravan to Syria, and some of years afterwards made the same journey in the service of the wealthy widow named Khadija. So faithfully did he transact the widow's business, and so excellent was the report of his behavior, which he received from her old servant who had accompanied him, that she soon afterwards married her young agent, and the marriage proved a very happy one, though he was 15 years older than he was. Throughout the 26 years of their life together, he remained devoted to her, and after her death, when he took other wives, he always mentioned her with the greatest love and reverence. This marriage gave him a rank among the notables of Mecca, while his conduct earned for him the surname Al-Amin, the trustworthy. The Hunafa. The Meccans claimed descent from Abraham through Ismails, and tradition stated that their temple, the Kaaba, had been built by Abraham for the worship of the one God. It was still called the house of Allah, but the chief objects of worship here were a number of idols which were called daughters of Allah and intercessors. The few who felt disgust at this idolatry, who had prevailed for centuries long for the religion of Abraham, and tried to find out what has been in teaching. Such seekers of the truth were known as Hunafas, that is singular Hanif, a word originally meaning those who turn away from the existing idol worship, but coming in the end to have a sense of upright, or by nature upright, because such persons held the way of truth to be right conduct. These Hunafa did not form a community. They were non-conformists of their day, each seeking truth by the light of his inner consciousness. Muhammad, son of the Abdullah, became one of these. First revelation. It was his practice to retire often to a cave in the desert for meditation. His place of retreat was Hira, a cave in a mountain called the Mountain of Light, not far from Mecca. And his chosen month was Ramadan, the month of heat. It was there one night towards the end of his wait month that the first revelation came to him when he was 40 years old. He heard a voice say, "Read." He said, "I cannot read." The voice again said, "Read." He said, "I cannot read." Third time the voice, more terrible, commanded, "Read." He said, "What can I read?" The voice said, "Read in the name of thy Lord who created the man from a clot." Read. "And it is thy Lord the most bountiful, who teacheth by the pen, teacheth man what which he knew not." The vision of the cave Hira. The cave Hira in the mountain of light, Jabal al-Nur. He went out of the cave on the hillside and heard the same inspiring voice say, "O Muhammad, thou art Allah's messenger and am Jibreel." Then he raised his eyes and saw the angel in the likeness of a man standing in the sky above the horizon. And again the dreadful voice said, "O Muhammad, thou art Allah's messenger and I am Jibreel." Muhammad, peace the blessing be upon him, stood quite still, turning away his face from the brightness of the vision. But wherever he turned his face, there stood the angels confronting him. They remained thus a long while till at length the angel vanished. When he returned to great distress of mind and his wife Khadija, radiallahu anha, she did her best to reassure him, saying that his conduct had been such that Allah would not let a harmful spirit come to him, and that it was her hope that he was to become the prophet of his people. On their return to Mecca, she took him to her cousin Waraka ibn Nawfal, a very old man who knew the scriptures of Jews and Christians, who declared him his belief that the heavenly messenger who came to Moses of old had come to Muhammad, and that he was chosen as the prophet of his people. Muhammad eventually accepted the tremendous task imposed on him, becoming filled with enthusiasm of obedience. His distress. To understand the reason of the prophet's difference and his extreme distress of mind after the vision of Hira, it must be remembered that the Hunafa, of whom he had been one, sought true religion in the natural world and regarded with distrust the intercourse with spirit of which men, avid of the unseen, sorcerers and soothsayers and even poets, boasted in those days. Moreover, he was a man of humble and devout intelligence, a lover of quiet and solitude, and the very thought of being chosen out of all mankind to face mankind alone, which such a message appalled him at the first. The recognition of the divine nature of the call he had received involved a changing in his whole mental outlook sufficiently disturbing a sensitive and honest mind, and also the forsaking of his quiet, honored way of life. The early biographers tell how his wife Khadija tested the spirit which came to him and proved it to be good, and how, with the continuance of the revelations and the conviction that they brought, he at length accepted the tremendous task imposed on him, become, becoming filled with enthusiasm of obedience, which justifies his proudest title of the slave of Allah. The first covenants, the first converts. For the first 3 years, or rather less, of his mission, the Prophet preached to his family and his intimate friends, while the people of Makkah as a whole regarded him as one who had become a little mad. The first of all his converts was his wife Khadija, the second his first cousin Ali, whom he had adopted, the third his servant Zaid, the former slave. His old friend Abu Bakr also was among those early converts. Beginning of persecution. At the end of the third year, the Prophet received the command to arise and warn, whereupon he began to preach in public, pointing out the wretched folly of idolatry in face of the tremendous loss of day and night, of life and death, of growth and decay, which manifest the power of Allah and attest His sovereignty. It was then when he began to speak against their gods that Quraysh became actively hostile, persecuting his poorer disciples, mocking and insulting him. The one consideration which prevented him from killing him was fear of the blood vengeance of clan to which his family belonged. Strong in his inspiration, the Prophet went on warning, pleading, threatening, while Quraysh did all they could to ridicule his teaching and reject his followers. The flight to Abyssinia. In 16th century map of Abyssinia, that modern day Ethiopia, the converts of the first 4 years were mostly humble folk, unable to defend themselves against oppressions. So cruel was the persecution they endured that a prophet advised all who could possibly continue to do so to immigrate to a Christian country, Abyssinia. And still, in spite of persecution and emigration, the little company of Muslims grew in number. Quraysh were seriously alarmed. The idol worship at the Kaaba, the holy place to which all Arabia made pilgrimages, ranked for them as the guardians of the Kaaba as first among their vested interest. At the season of the pilgrimage, they posted men on all the roads to warn the tribes against the madman who was preaching in their midst. They tried to bring the prophet to a compromise, offering accept his religion if he would so modify it as to make room for their gods as intercessors with Allah, offering to make him their king if he would give up attacking idolatry. And when their efforts at negotiations failed, they went to his uncle Abu Talib, offering to give him the best of their young men in a place of Muhammad, to give him all that he desired, if only he would let them kill Muhammad and have done with him. Abu Talib refused. Conversion of Umar. The exasperation of the idolaters was increased by the conversion of Omar, one of their stalwarts. They grew more and more embittered till things came to such a pass that they decided to ostracize the Prophet whole clan. Idolaters who protected him as well as Muslims who believed in him. Their chief men caused documents to be drawn up the effect that none of them or those belonging to them would hold any intercourse with that clan or sell to them or buy from them. This they all signed and it was deposited in the Kaaba. Then when 3 years, the Prophet was shut up with all his kinsfolk in their stronghold, which was situated in one of the gorges which run down to Mecca. Only at the time of pilgrimage could he go out and preach, or did any of his kinsfolk dare to go into the city. Destruction of the documents. At length, some kinder hearts among Quraysh grew weary of the boycott of old friends and neighbors. They managed to have the document which had been placed in the Kaaba brought out for reconsideration. When it was found that all the writings had been destroyed by white ants, except the word Bismik Allahumma, in thy name of Allah. When the elders saw that marvel, the ban was removed, and the Prophet was again free to go about the city. But meanwhile, the opposition to his preaching had grown rigid. He had little success among the Meccans, and an attempt which he made to preach in the city of Taif was a failure. His mission was failure, judged by worldly standard when at the season of the yearly pilgrimage he came upon a little group of men who heard him gladly. The men from Yathrib. They came from Yathrib, a city more than 200 miles away, which was since becoming world famous as a Medina, the city for excellence. At Yathrib, there were Jewish tribes with learned rabbis who had often spoken to the pagans of Prophet soon to come among the Arabs with whom when he came. The Jews would destroy the pagans as the tribes of Ad and Thamud and had been destroyed of old for their idolatry. When the men from Yathrib saw Muhammad, they recognized him as the prophet whom the Jewish rabbis had described to them. When they returned to Yathrib, they told what they had seen and heard, and the result that the next session of pilgrimage, the deputation came from Yathrib purposely to meet the prophet. Quraysh dreaded what the prophet might become if he escaped from them and so plotted to kill him. First pact of Al Aqaba. These swore allegiance to him in the first pact of Al Aqaba. They then returned to Yathrib with a Muslim teacher in their company, and soon there was not a house in Yathrib wherein there was not mention of the messengers of Allah. Second pact of Al Aqaba. In the following year, at the time of pilgrimage, 73 Muslims from Yathrib came to Mecca to owe allegiance to the Prophet and invite him to their city. At Al Aqaba by night, they swore to defend him as they would defend their own wives and children. It was then, it was then that the Hijrah, the flight to Yathrib was decided. The flight to Yathrib was decided. plot to plot to murder the Prophet. Soon the Muslims who were in a position to do so began to sell their property and to leave Mecca un, unpursuedly. Quraysh had wind of what was going on. They hated Muhammad in their midst, but dreaded what he might become if he escaped from them. It would be better, they considered, to destroy him now. The death of Abu Talib had removed his chief protector, but still they had to reckon with the re- vengeance of his clan upon the clan of the murderer. They cast lot and chose a slayer out of every clan. All these were to attack the Prophet simultaneously and strike together as one man. Thus, his murder would be blamed on all Quraysh. It was at this time Ibn Khaldun asserts, and it is the only satisfactory explanation of what happened afterwards, that the Prophet received the first revelation ordering him to make war upon his persecutors until persecution is no more and religion is for Allah only. The Hijrah, the last of the able Muslims to remain in Mecca were Abu Bakr, Ali, and Prophet himself. Abu Bakr, a man of wealth, had brought two riding camels and retained a guide in readiness for the flight. The Prophet also waited for God's command. It came at last. It was the night appointed for his murder. The slayers were before his house. He gave his cloak to Ali, binding him lie down on the bed so that anyone looking in might think Muhammad lay there. The slayers were to strike him as he came out of the house, whether in the night or early morning. He knew they would not injure Ali. Then he left the house, and it is said blindness fell upon the would-be murderers, so that he put dust on their heads as he passed by without their knowing it. The Hijrah counts as the beginning of the Muslim era. He went to Abu Bakr's house and called him, and they two went together to a caravan in the desert hill and hid there till the hue and cry was past. Abu Bakr, son and daughter, and his herdsmen bringing them food and tiding after rainfall. After nightfall, one such party came quite near them in their hiding place. The Abu Bakr was afraid, but the Prophet said, "Fear not, Allah is with us." Then when the coast was clear, Abu Bakr had the riding camels and the guidance brought to the cave at night, and they set out on the long ride to Yathrib. After traveling for many days of unfrequented paths, the fugitives reached a suburb of Yathrib. With, for weeks past, the people of the city had been going very morning, watching for the prophet till the heat drove them to shelter. The travelers arrived in the heat of the day. After the watches had retired, it was a Jew who called out the Muslims in derisive tones that he whom they expected had at last arrived. Such was the Hijrah, the flight from Mecca to Yathrib. which counts as the beginning of the Muslims era. The 13 years of humiliation, of persecution, of seeming failure, of prophecy still unfulfilled were over. So far we discussed the Prophet's life in Mecca. If you have done, please subscribe our YouTube channel.